The shuttle docked at the Academy of Stellar Navigation with a soft hiss, and Danny Cole pressed his face against the small window to get his first look at the place that would decide his future. The Academy was massive, a ring of silver metal and glowing blue lights that circled the giant orange planet below. Ships of every shape and size moved around it like fish swimming through water, and Danny felt his heart beat faster as he grabbed his bag and stepped into the docking tube. He had traveled for 3 months to get here, 3 months in the cold emptiness of space, eating terrible food and sleeping in a bed too small for his body, but none of that mattered now. He was here. He was one of only 3 humans ever accepted into the most famous navigation school in the galaxy, and he was not going to waste this chance. The docking tube opened into a wide hallway filled with aliens of every kind. Danny saw tall creatures with scales that changed color as they walked. He saw short beings with too many arms and eyes that sat on stalks above their heads. He saw things he could not even describe, things that made him feel very small and very far from home. But he kept walking, following the signs toward the registration office, trying not to stare. A voice called his name, and he turned to see a young woman pushing through the crowd toward him. She had brown hair tied back in a simple knot, and a smile that made him feel less alone in this strange place. "Danny Cole," she asked. "I'm Lyra, also human, also wondering what we got ourselves into." Danny shook her hand and felt some of the tension leave his shoulders. "Good to meet you. I was starting to think I was the only one of us here." "There's supposed to be one more," Lyra said as they walked together. "But I heard he dropped out during the journey, couldn't handle the isolation." She shrugged. "So it's just us, 2 humans against the galaxy's finest." They completed their registration and received their room assignments, their class schedules, and their uniform codes. Everything was designed for beings much different from them, and Danny spent his first night trying to figure out how to adjust his bed so it would not fold him in half while he slept. The next morning, he entered his first class and found a seat near the back of the large room. The other students were already there, talking in languages his translator struggled to keep up with. Most of them ignored him completely. A few looked at him with curiosity. 1 or 2 looked at him with something that might have been discussed. Then the instructor arrived, and the room went silent. Instructor was a species known for their intelligence and their long lives. He stood 7 feet tall, with scales that shimmered between green and gold as he moved. His eyes were yellow and cold, and when he spoke, his voice filled every corner of the room without him needing to raise it. "Welcome to Advanced Stellar Navigation," he said. "I have taught this course for 200 years. In that time, I have seen students from every corner of the galaxy sit where you sit now. Some of them became great navigators. Most of them did not. By the end of this term, I will know which category each of you belongs to." He paused, and his yellow eyes moved across the room until they landed on Danny. They stayed there for a moment too long before moving on. "Your final examination will be the passage," continued. "For those of you unfamiliar with it, the passage is a corridor of space plagued by magnetic storms so violent that they scramble navigation systems and destroy standard shielding. In my entire career, no student has ever passed through the magnetic storm on their first attempt. The storm is a natural filter. It separates true navigators from those who merely pretend." A murmur ran through the class. Danny had heard of the passage. Everyone had. It was legendary, a test that broke even the best pilots. Ships went in with perfect systems and came out as floating wreckage. The magnetic pulses were so strong and so unpredictable that no computer could calculate a safe path through them. After class, Danny went to the Academy's data library and requested everything they had on the passage. He spent hours reading through reports, watching recordings of failed attempts, and studying the patterns of the magnetic storms. Most of the data was discouraging. The storms seemed completely random, striking without warning from every direction. But as Danny looked deeper, he began to notice something. The pulses were not as random as they appeared. There was a rhythm to them, almost like a heartbeat. It was faint and easy to miss, but it was there. The storm breathed in and out, and between each breath was a tiny moment of calm. He shared his finding with Lyra that night in the common area. "You think you found a pattern that 200 years of science missed?" she asked, not mocking but genuinely curious. "I think they stopped looking," Danny said. "They decided the storm was impossible, so they never tried to understand it. They just learned to survive it long enough to fail gracefully." Lyra nodded slowly. "So what are you going to do about it?" Danny looked out the window at the swirling clouds of the gas giant below. Somewhere beyond those clouds, beyond this station, beyond everything he knew, the passage waited. And inside it, the storm that had defeated everyone was still beating its ancient rhythm. "I'm going to learn how to listen," he said. The next few weeks were hard, seemed to take special pleasure in pointing out Danny's weaknesses. Humans were slow, the instructor reminded the class. Humans had poor reflexes. Humans relied too much on emotion and not enough on calculation. Every lesson felt like a personal attack, and every night Danny went back to his room feeling smaller than before. But he kept studying, he kept listening, and slowly the rhythm of the storm began to make sense. The simulation chamber was cold and dark when Danny entered it for the 20th time that week. He had been coming here every night after his classmates went asleep, running the passage program over and over until his eyes burned and his hands ached from gripping the controls. And every night he failed. The simulation was brutal. The magnetic pulses came from everywhere, slamming into his virtual ship and sending his instruments spinning into chaos. His shields failed within the first 30,000 kilometers. His navigation computer crashed at 50,000. By the time he reached the halfway point, his ship was always dead in the water, floating helplessly as the storm tore it apart. But Danny kept trying. He was not smart enough to outthink the storm. He was not fast enough to outrun it. His human reflexes were exactly as slow as instructor said they were, but there had to be another way. There was always another way. One night, Lyra found him slumped over the simulation controls, half asleep and covered in sweat. "You look terrible," she said, sitting down next to him. "Thanks," Danny muttered. "That means a lot." "I'm serious. You can't keep doing this. You're going to burn out before the examination even happens." Danny rubbed his eyes and looked at the frozen image of his destroyed ship on the screen. "I'm close to something. I can feel it. The storm has a pattern, Lyra. I know it does. I just can't figure out how to use it." Lyra was quiet for a moment. Then she said something that changed everything. "Maybe you're thinking about it wrong. You keep trying to fight the storm or avoid it. What if you're supposed to move with it instead?" Danny stared at her. His mind went back to his childhood in California, to the summers he spent on the beach learning how to surf. His uncle had taught him that the worst thing a surfer could do was fight the wave. The ocean was bigger and stronger than any person. The only way to survive was to stop fighting and start flowing. You had to feel the water moving beneath you and let it carry you forward. "Move with it," Danny repeated slowly. "Not against it, not around it, through it." He turned back to the simulation and started a new run. But this time, instead of trying to dodge the magnetic pulses, he let them push him. He stopped fighting the instruments when they went crazy and started trusting his own senses instead. He closed his eyes and listened to the rhythm of the storm, waiting for the tiny gaps between the beats. The first pulse hit his ship and knocked him sideways. But instead of correcting hard, Danny let the momentum carry him. He nudged the controls gently, adjusting his angle just enough to catch the next pulse at a better position. The ship rocked and shook, but it kept moving forward. 60,000 kilometers, 70,000, 80. His heart was pounding. His hands were steady. He could feel the storm now, not as an enemy but as a partner in a dangerous dance. Every pulse pushed him, and every push was a chance to move closer to the other side. At 100,000 kilometers, the simulation ended. He had beaten his previous record by 50,000. "It works," he whispered. "It actually works." The next morning, Danny requested permission to modify his examination vessel. The request caused confusion among the academy administrators, who had never received such a petition from a student before. Ships assigned for examinations were standardized, tuned to exact specifications that had been proven over centuries. No one changed them. But Danny was persistent, and eventually his request reached instructor. The called Danny to his office, a cold room filled with star charts and ancient navigation instruments. Sat behind a desk made of dark metal, his yellow eyes fixed on Danny like a predator watching prey. "You wish to modify your ship," said. It was not a question. "Yes, instructor." "Explain." Danny took a breath. The automated navigation systems can't handle the magnetic interference. They try to calculate paths that don't exist because they can't process the data fast enough. I want to remove them and install manual controls instead. Scales shifted from gold to a darker shade of green. "You want to fly blind through the most dangerous passage in this sector of space." "Not blind," Danny said. "Different. I want to fly by feel instead of by calculation." The room was silent for a long moment, then made a sound that might have been a laugh. "Human arrogance," he said. "Your species has been traveling between stars for only 40 years. My people have been doing it for 12,000, and you believe you have found something we missed." "I believe there might be more than one way to solve a problem," instructor stood up and walked to the window. The gas giant filled the view, its storms swirling in endless patterns that had existed long before any species learned to fly. "I will approve your request," he said finally. "Not because I believe you will succeed. I approve it because your failure will serve as a useful lesson for future human applicants. Sometimes the best way to teach wisdom is to let foolishness destroy itself." Danny nodded. "Thank you, instructor." "Do not thank me," said without turning around. "When you are floating in the wreckage of your primitive ship, waiting for rescue in the darkness of the storm, remember that I gave you exactly what you asked for." Danny left the office and went straight to the engineering bay where Lyra was waiting. Together, they began the work of stripping out the automated systems and replacing them with controls that responded to touch instead of calculation. Other students stopped by to watch, whispering to each other about the crazy human who thought he could outsmart the storm. One of them was a quiet student with gray skin and large black eyes. Unlike the others, did not laugh or whisper. He simply watched, and when the work was done, he approached Danny with a question. "Why do you believe this will work?" Danny wiped grease from his hands and looked at because everything that thinks like a machine has failed. Maybe it's time to try thinking like something else. Considered this for a moment. Then he nodded once and walked away without another word. That night, Danny sat in his modified ship and ran his hands over the manual controls. They felt rough and simple compared to the smooth panels of the standard vessels, but they also felt real. They felt like something he could trust. The examination was 3 days away. The storm was waiting, and Danny was finally ready to dance. The Academy's restricted archive was located in the oldest section of the station, a place where the metal walls were darker and the lights flickered with age. Danny had to request special permission to enter, and even then, the archivist who guided him through the dusty corridors seemed unhappy about the intrusion. "No one comes here anymore," the archivist said. He was a small creature with wrinkled blue skin and eyes that had seen too many centuries pass. "Students today think all knowledge lives in their computers. They forget that some things were never put into digital form." Danny followed him past rows of shelves filled with objects he did not recognize. There were crystals that hummed when he walked by them, and metal plates covered in symbols that seemed to move when he was not looking directly at them. Finally, They reached a section marked with symbols from a language that had been dead for 1,000 years. "The old navigation records," the archivist said. "What specifically are you looking for?" "Anything about the passage from before the storms got worse. I read that it used to be a trade route." The archivist made a sound that might have been surprise. "You did your research." "Yes, 500 years ago, ships crossed the passage regularly. Then the magnetic activity increased and the route was abandoned. Most of the old navigation methods were forgotten." He reached up with a limb that bent in too many places and pulled down a metal container covered in dust. Inside were thin sheets of a material that felt like paper, but was much stronger. Danny handled them carefully, aware that he was touching something older than human civilization. The sheets contained diagrams and notes written in a flowing script. His translator struggled with the ancient language, but slowly the meaning became clear. The old pilots had used a technique called pulse riding. Instead of trying to avoid the magnetic waves, they had learned to ride them like sailors riding ocean currents. They felt the rhythm of the storm and used its energy to push their ships forward. "This is it," Danny whispered. "This is exactly what I was looking for." The archivist peered at the sheets over his shoulder. "Interesting. That technique was removed from academy teaching centuries ago. The instructors decided it was too dangerous and too dependent on individual skill. Modern navigation philosophy favors methods that any pilot can learn, regardless of natural ability." "But it worked," Danny said. "The old pilots made it through." "Some of them did. Many did not. The failure rate was high, and the academy decided that standardized training produced more consistent results, even if those results meant no one ever fully mastered the passage." Danny carefully the diagrams and notes into his personal device. His mind was racing with possibilities. The old technique matched exactly what he had been developing on his own. He was not inventing something new. He was rediscovering something lost. That night, he shared his discovery with Lyra in her workshop. She studied the diagrams with the focused attention of an engineer who loved solving problems. "The physics make sense," she said. "The magnetic pulses create bow waves like a boat moving through water. If you can position your ship at the right angle, the bow wave will push you instead of crushing you. But the timing has to be perfect. A fraction of a second off and you're dead." "Humans are supposed to have slow reflexes," Danny said. "That's what keeps telling me." Lyra shook her head. "Reflexes are about reacting after something happens. This is different. This is about anticipating what's going to happen before it does. That's not reflex. That's intuition, and humans have plenty of that." A knock on the door interrupted them. Danny opened it to find standing in the hallway, his large black eyes reflecting the light from inside the room. "May I enter?" he asked. Danny looked at Lyra, who shrugged. He stepped aside and let in. They looked around the workshop, taking in the diagrams pinned to the walls and the pieces of ship equipment scattered across the tables. Then he turned to Danny. "I have been watching you," said. "At first I thought you were foolish like the others said, but now I am not certain. You approach problems differently than anyone I have met." "Is that a compliment?" Danny asked. "It is an observation. Among my people, there are old stories about humans, stories that are very different from what the Academy teaches." "What kind of stories?" Was quiet for a moment, as if deciding how much to share. "The Academy teaches that humans are a young species, primitive and slow. But the stories my grandmother told me say something else. They say humans are creatures who refuse to accept limits. When the universe tells a human that something is impossible, the human does not believe it. They push and push until the impossible becomes possible." Danny felt something stir in his chest. It was not pride exactly, but something close to it. "My grandmother said that one day, humans would do things that make the old species afraid. Not because humans are stronger or smarter, but because humans do not know when to stop trying." Your grandmother sounds wise, Lyra said. She was, replied. She died before I was born, but her story stayed with my family. He looked at Danny with an expression that was hard to read. I hope her stories were true. I hope you prove them true. The next day, Danny returned to the simulation chamber with new confidence. He loaded the pulse riding parameters into his practice runs and began training his body to feel what his instruments could not show him. Hour after hour, he flew through virtual storms, letting the magnetic waves push him, learning to anticipate their rhythm before they struck. His scores improved steadily. 100,000 kilometers became 120. 120 became 150. He was not just surviving the storm anymore. He was beginning to master it. On the night before the examination, made an unannounced visit to the simulation chamber. Danny did not notice him until the session ended, and he opened his eyes to find the standing in the doorway. 162,000 kilometers, said, reading the score on the display. Impressive for a simulation, but simulations are not reality. The real storm does not forgive mistakes. I know, Danny said. Do you? I have seen many confident students walk into that passage. I have watched their confidence die long before their ships did. Stepped closer, his scales shifting to a deep red that Danny had not seen before. You are not special, human. You are simply too ignorant to understand your own limitations. Danny stood up and faced the instructor. They were close enough that he could see his own reflection in those cold, yellow eyes. Maybe you're right, Danny said quietly. Or maybe you stopped believing that anyone could succeed so long ago that you forgot what belief looks like. Said nothing. He turned and walked away, leaving Danny alone with the hum of the simulation equipment and the weight of tomorrow pressing down on his shoulders. The morning of the examination arrived with a silence that seemed to fill every corridor of the academy. Danny woke before his alarm and lay in his bed, staring at the ceiling and listening to his own heartbeat. In a few hours, he would either prove that humans belonged among the stars or become another cautionary tale that instructors told their students. He dressed slowly, checking each piece of his flight suit twice. Lyra met him outside his quarters with a cup of something hot that smelled like coffee but probably was not. I stayed up all night running diagnostics on your ship, she said. Everything is working perfectly. The manual controls are responsive, and I added a small backup power cell in case your main systems get fried. Thank you, Danny said, taking the cup, for everything. Don't thank me yet. Thank me when you're on the other side of that storm. They walked together to the launch bay, where the examination ships were lined up in a neat row. 12 students would attempt the passage today. Danny's ship was at the end of the line, looking rough and strange next to the sleek standard vessels. Some of the other students pointed and whispered when they saw it. Instructor stood on a raised platform at the front of the bay, his scales glowing bright gold under the artificial lights. Behind him, a massive screen displayed a map of the passage, with the magnetic storm rendered as a swirling mass of red and orange. Today you will face the greatest challenge of your training, announced. The passage is 200,000 kilometers of chaos. Your goal is simple: reach the other side. Your ships will record your progress, and emergency beacons will activate automatically if your life support fails. There is no shame in failure. There is only the lesson it teaches. He paused, letting his words sink in. You will launch in order of registration. The first pilot will depart in 10 minutes. Danny watched as the first student climbed into a ship and launched into the darkness. The screen tracked the vessel's progress as it entered the storm. For a few minutes, everything seemed fine. Then the magnetic pulses began and the ship started to struggle. At 43,000 kilometers, the shields failed. At 51,000, the navigation computer crashed. At 62,000, the emergency beacon activated, and the ship was pulled to safety by automated recovery drones. The second student lasted until 70,000 kilometers. The third made it to 85. Each failure was displayed on the screen for everyone to see, a reminder that the storm did not care about training or reputation or species. Was the eighth to launch. Danny watched with particular attention as they entered the passage. Was a skilled pilot, calm and precise. His ship moved smoothly through the first 50,000 kilometers, handling the pulses with textbook technique. But textbook technique was not enough. At 100,000 kilometers, a massive pulse caught ship at a bad angle. The vessel spun wildly, systems overloading one after another. Fought hard, trying to regain control, but the storm was relentless. At 123,000 kilometers, the beacon activated. It was the farthest anyone had gone today, but it was still not far enough. 3 more students launched and failed. Then it was Danny's turn. He climbed into his ship and sealed the hatch behind him. The cockpit was darker than the standard vessels because he had removed the extra display screens. Only the essential instruments remained, and even those would be useless once the storm took hold. His hands rested on the manual controls, feeling their rough texture against his palms. "Launch when ready," his voice came through the communicator. Danny took a deep breath. He thought about California and the ocean and his uncle teaching him to feel the water instead of fighting it. He thought about Lyra working through the night to make his ship ready. He thought about his grandmother and her stories about humans who did not know when to stop. "Launching now," he said. The ship shot forward into the darkness, leaving the academy behind. The stars stretched into lines for a brief moment, and then he was at the edge of the passage. The storm filled a wall of swirling energy that looked like it wanted to devour him. Danny cut his main engines and let the ship drift toward the storm. He closed his eyes and listened. At first there was only silence. Then slowly he began to hear it, the rhythm, the heartbeat of the storm. The first pulse hit his ship like a giant hand slapping him sideways. His instruments screamed warnings before going dark, exactly as he expected. He was flying blind now, with nothing but his instincts to guide him. But he was not afraid. The fear had burned away, replaced by a strange calm. He could feel the storm around him, feel its energy pressing against his ship from every direction. And between the pulses he felt the gaps, tiny moments of calm, like the space between heartbeats. He nudged the controls gently, adjusting his angle. The next pulse hit, and instead of fighting it, he let it push him. His ship accelerated forward, riding the bow wave like a surfer riding a wave back home. 50,000 kilometers. The storm was screaming now, pulses coming faster and harder. Danny's hands moved without conscious thought, making tiny adjustments that kept his ship balanced on the edge of chaos. 75,000 kilometers. A pulse caught him wrong and sent him spinning. For a terrible moment, he lost the rhythm and thought he was finished. But then he found it again, that steady heartbeat beneath the chaos, and he pulled himself back on course. 100,000 kilometers. He was past where most students failed. The storm was stronger here, the pulses more violent. His ship groaned under the strain, and he could smell something burning somewhere behind him. 150,000 kilometers. The largest pulse he had felt yet was building ahead of him. He could sense it growing, a massive wave of magnetic force that would crush anything in its path. Every piece of training he had received told him to pull back, to try to dodge around it. But dodging was not possible. The pulse was too big, too fast. Danny opened his eyes and looked at the wave of energy rushing toward him. Then he did something that no computer would ever calculate and no instructor would ever teach. He accelerated directly into it. The pulse hit his ship with force that should have torn it apart, but Danny had positioned himself perfectly, riding the very tip of the bow wave as it crashed through space. The energy did not crush him. It carried him, launching him forward with incredible speed. 170,000 kilometers, 180, 190. The end of the passage appeared on his damaged sensors. A clear space beyond the storm, stars shining steady and calm. Danny burst out of the storm and into open space. His ship was battered and smoking, half his systems were dead, and his hands were shaking so badly he could barely hold the controls. But he was through. He had done what no one had done in 200 years. He had passed the magnetic storm on his first attempt. The return journey to the Academy felt like a dream. Danny's ship limped through space on emergency power, its hull blackened from the storm. Warning lights blinked on the few instruments that still worked, telling him things he already knew. The ship was dying, but it had done its job, and now it just needed to carry him home. As he approached the Academy station, he saw something unusual. Ships were gathered around the docking bay, more ships than he had ever seen there before. Some of them bore markings from species he did not recognize, symbols from distant parts of the galaxy. Word had spread fast. His communicator crackled to life with Lyra's voice. "Danny, are you seeing this? There are representatives here from 6 different species. News of your passage reached the sector network while you were still in the storm." "I just want to land," Danny said, his voice tired but calm. "I just want to get out of this ship and stand on something solid." "The docking bay is clear for you. I'll be waiting." The ship touched down with a shudder that suggested it would never fly again. Danny powered down the systems and sat in the darkness for a moment, letting the reality of what he had done sink in. Then he opened the hatch and stepped out into the light. The docking bay was full of people. Humans and aliens stood together, and when Danny appeared, a wave of whispers rippled through the crowd. He looked for familiar faces and found Lyra pushing her way toward him. She hugged him hard, not caring who was watching. "You did it. You actually did it." "We did it," Danny said. "I couldn't have done it without your work on the ship." Behind Lyra, he saw standing at the edge of the crowd. This face was hard to read, but there was something in those large black eyes that might have been respect. Danny nodded to him and nodded back. A path cleared through the crowd. An instructor walked toward Danny. The scales were a color Danny had never seen before, a pale blue that seemed uncertain, almost confused. The cold yellow eyes studied Danny as if seeing him for the first time. "You are summoned to the assembly hall," said. His voice was quieter than usual, missing its usual edge of superiority. "Representatives from the Galactic Navigation Council wish to speak with you." Danny followed through the corridors of the Academy, aware of the eyes watching him from every direction. Students pressed against walls to let him pass. Instructors who had never noticed him before now stared with expressions of disbelief. The assembly hall was the largest room in the Academy, a circular chamber with seats rising in tiers around a central platform. Today, those seats were filled with beings from across the galaxy. Danny recognized some species from his classes. Others were completely foreign to him, creatures from parts of space that humans had not yet visited. Led him to the central platform and then stepped back, leaving Danny alone under the lights. "Danny Cole of Earth," a voice announced. The speaker was a being Danny did not recognize, tall and thin with skin that seemed to be made of living metal. "You have accomplished something that has not been done in 200 years. The Council wishes to understand how." Danny looked around at the faces watching him. Politicians and scientists and military officers from a dozen different worlds, all waiting to hear what a young human had to say. "I listened," Danny said simply. "Everyone told me the storm was chaos, that it was impossible to predict, but nothing is truly random. Everything has a pattern if you look hard enough. The storm has a rhythm, like a heartbeat. I learned to feel that rhythm and move with it instead of against it." Murmurs spread through the assembly, the metal-skinned being leaned forward. "The technique you describe was abandoned centuries ago. It was considered too dangerous and too dependent on individual talent." "Maybe that was a mistake," Danny said. "Maybe some things can't be standardized. Maybe some challenges require us to be different, not the same." Instructor stepped forward. For a moment, Danny thought that was going to argue or make another comment about human arrogance, but instead did something unexpected. "The human speaks truth," said. "For 200 years, I have taught students to rely on technology and calculation. I have watched thousands of them fail the passage and told myself that failure was inevitable. But I was wrong. The ancient technique was removed from our teachings not because it did not work, but because it could not be taught in standardized ways. We chose consistency over excellence. We chose predictable failure over unpredictable success." He turned to face Danny directly. The examination was never truly about the storm. It was about finding pilots who could think beyond their training. In 2 centuries, you are the first to prove that such pilots still exist. The assembly was silent, then made an announcement that sent shockwaves through the room. "The Academy wishes to offer you a position on our teaching staff. You would be responsible for training the next generation of navigators in the techniques you have rediscovered." Danny felt the weight of the offer pressing down on him. A teaching position at the most prestigious navigation school in the galaxy. It was more than any human had ever been offered. It was more than he had ever imagined possible. But something inside him knew it was not right. "I'm honored," Danny said slowly, "but I have to decline." Gasps echoed through the hall, even looked stunned. "Instead," Danny continued, "I want to propose something different. An exchange program. Humans sharing our methods with other species and other species sharing their methods with us. Not tests and secrets, but open cooperation. The galaxy is too big for any one species to explore alone." The metal-skinned being considered this for a long moment. Then, slowly, it nodded. "An interesting proposal. The Council will discuss it." 3 months later, Danny stood on the bridge of a new ship, looking out at stars he had never seen before. Lyra was at the engineering station, running diagnostics on systems she had designed herself. Sat at the navigation console, his gray hands moving across controls that combined precision with human intuition. They were heading toward a region of space that had never been explored, a place where the charts ended and the unknown began. Behind them, the first class of the new exchange program was beginning at the Academy, students from a dozen species learning to share their knowledge instead of hoarding it. Somewhere far away, Instructor was watching their departure on a screen in his office. His scales had shifted to a warm gold color that his colleagues had never seen before. It was the color of hope. Danny looked at his crew and smiled. "Ready." "Ready," Lyra said. Nodded. "Let us see what else the universe has hidden from us." The ship's engines hummed to life, and they jumped into the unknown, leaving trails of light behind them that would guide others to follow. The galaxy was vast and full of dangers, but it was also full of possibilities, and Danny Cole intended to find every single one of them.